The weight of closed eyes. She closed her eyes. That single act, so small, so quiet, was the thing that finally broke Eli Carter open. He had crossed 17 meters of scorched alien soil to reach her, boots crunching over the brittle glass that used to be someone's window, someone's wall, someone's world. The alien woman was propped against the twisted wreckage of a downed dropship, its hull peeled back like the skin of something wounded. She was bleeding, dark silver fluid seeping steadily into the pale dust beneath her, soaking the cracked earth in slow, expanding rings. Her hands trembled. Her breathing was a shallow, irregular thing, more habit than intention. When she heard him approach, the heavy, deliberate footfall of a human soldier in scavenged combat plating, she had turned her head toward him. She had looked at him fully. And then she had simply closed her eyes, not in defiance, not in unconsciousness, in surrender, in the quiet, terrible certainty that she was about to die, and that there was nothing left to do but accept it. Eli stopped walking, across the broken valley of Karen 9. Fire still burned low along the ridgeline, painting the shattered alien cityscape in slow pulses of red and amber. Wrecked starships jutted from the rubble at broken angles, their silhouettes like the bones of dead gods against a sky choked with ash and electromagnetic haze. The battle had ended hours ago, maybe longer. Time had a way of dissolving when survival became the only priority left. He stood a few paces from her and did not move for a long moment. He had seen fear before. He had seen it in the eyes of soldiers, civilians, prisoners, and enemies across 3 different star systems. He had caused it, too, not always deliberately, but inevitably. Every human soldier had, whether they admitted it or not. But this was something different. This was fear that had exhausted itself. This was surrender so complete it felt almost sacred, like watching someone lay down a burden they had carried their entire life. Slowly, Eli reached up and removed his helmet. Cold alien air hit his face immediately, sharp and metallic, carrying the faint bitterness of ozone and scorched crystal. His hair was matted with sweat against his forehead. His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion and grit. Without the helmet, he looked considerably less like a weapon. He looked like a tired man who had seen too many things he couldn't unremember. "I'm not going to kill you," he said. The universal translator embedded at her collar flickered twice, then hummed softly as it processed the words and converted them into something her mind could receive. Her eyes stayed closed. Eli exhaled slowly through his nose. "Yeah, that tracks. Nobody ever believes that part." The woman was tall, even seated and injured, long-limbed and built with a particular elegant economy of the Aurelian people. Her skin was pale blue, almost luminescent in the low firelight, patterned with faintly glowing lines that traced the curves of her anatomy like a biological circuit board. Those lines pulsed weakly now, their rhythm unsteady. The Aurelians were famous across the inhabited galaxy. Brilliant strategic minds. Cold, precise diplomats. Ruthless when provoked or cornered. And deeply, historically, institutionally terrified of humans. Eli knelt down, keeping his hands visible and low, palms out. "You're bleeding out," he said, voice quieter now, more conversational. "If I wanted you dead, I could just wait." That made her eyes open. They were gold, wide, brilliant, and full of something that sat between disbelief and horror. The look of someone who had been given an answer they didn't know how to fit into any existing framework. "You speak," she said. Her voice was low, slightly musical, as though the language she was using had been designed for a different kind of atmosphere. "Yeah," Eli said, "we do that sometimes." Her gaze dropped to the insignia scratched crudely into his chest plate, a human territorial marker, which, according to most alien intelligence databases, was essentially a warning symbol. She swallowed. "Why?" The word was simple, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of centuries behind it. Centuries of fear, of conflict, of carefully maintained distance. Why help her? Why kneel instead of standing over her body? Why offer words instead of weapon? Eli reached into his pack and retrieved a medical injector. Human-made, beaten up, but functional. He held it up so she could see it clearly before he moved any closer. "Because," he said, "today has already been bad enough." She flinched when he leaned in, every muscle in her body tensing at once. But she didn't fight, didn't cry out. She held herself very still, watching him with the careful, hollow attention of someone who had already made their peace and was simply waiting for the universe to catch up. The injector hissed softly as it made contact with her side, releasing a cloud of nanofibers that immediately began knitting together the torn tissue beneath. The silver seeping into the dust slowed, stopped. The erratic pulse of bioluminescence along her skin began to steady. She stared at him like he had rewritten the laws of physics in front of her. "You spare me," she said slowly, as though testing each word before committing to it. "Humans do not spare." Eli sat back on his heels. "We do," he said, "just not when we're scared." A silence settled between them. It was heavy, but it was no longer sharp. "My name is Eli," he said after a moment. She considered this for longer than strictly necessary. "Soon," she finally offered. "Well, soon." He stood and extended his hand toward her, open palm, fingers loose. "Looks like we're both still alive. That alone should scare the galaxy." She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she took it. Far above Karen 9, in the cold silence of orbital observation, hidden satellites tracked every second of this exchange. Alien intelligence cores processed the footage and flagged it for immediate review. The human removing his helmet, the medical aid administered without coercion, the hand extended in place of a weapon. Across dozens of star systems, analysts would spend weeks replaying this moment, trying to build a framework that could contain it. None of them could. This was not how humans were supposed to behave. And that misunderstanding, that fundamental, galaxy-wide miscalculation about what humanity actually was about to change everything. The shelter in the rubble soon woke to silence. Not the silence of battlefield, that taut, predatory quiet that preceded violence, but something deeper, heavier, the kind of silence that settled into the body and made a person wonder, slowly, whether they were still alive or had simply moved on to whatever came next. Her eyes opened gradually. The sky above her was wrong. Not the burning red haze of Karen 9's ruined atmosphere, but a pale metallic ceiling, softly humming with integrated blue lighting strips. Human construction, functional, unpretentious, built to work rather than impress. Crude by Aurelian aesthetic standards. Solid in a way that she found, against her better instincts, quietly reassuring. She inhaled. Pain flared along her side. Clean and controlled, the particular ache of a wound that had been treated and sealed rather than simply endured. She was alive. She was being kept alive. That realization moved through her chest like cold water. Her eyes snapped across the room, cataloging everything with trained efficiency. The space was small, reinforced walls built from scavenged hull plating. Humming environmental generators in the corners, a network of improvised conduits running across the ceiling like exposed veins. Weapons lined one wall, neatly arranged, accessible but not threatening in their placement. Tools and half-constructed devices covered another surface entirely. Pieces of technology from at least 4 different species, partially disassembled or mid-reconstruction. Everything in the room spoke the same language. Survival, adapted. And there, crouched at a console patched together from alien crystal lattice and human circuit boards, was Eli. His back was to her. Sleeves rolled to his elbows, forearms streaked with machine grease, both hands deep inside the exposed guts of a power relay unit. Sparks arced occasionally as he adjusted something with a multi-tool, his attention completely absorbed. "You're awake," he said, calmly, without turning. Soon went very still. "How did you know?" He glanced back over one shoulder, eyebrow raised. "You gasped." Loudly. She filed this away. Human sensory acuity was consistently underestimated in Aurelian intelligence profiles. "You could have killed me while I slept," she said. "Yeah," he replied, turning back to the console, "but that would have been rude." She studied him carefully now. The relaxed set of his shoulders, the deliberate economy of his movements, the way he worked without urgency but also without waste. He was a predator at rest, not passive, just choosing not to strike. "You are not what we were told," she said quietly. Eli snorted softly. "Funny, we say the same thing about you." Soon swung her legs over the edge of the cot and tested her strength, still depleted, but improving faster than she would have expected given the extent of the injury. She stood carefully. You should be afraid of me, she said. Already am, he replied. He glanced at her then. That's not what you meant, though. She steadied herself, one hand briefly on the wall. My people believe humans are fundamentally uncontrollable, that you are violent beyond reason, a species biologically incapable of restraint, that escalates every conflict until nothing remains. She paused. The strategic consensus was that you would eventually destroy yourselves and save the rest of the galaxy the trouble. Eli finally set down the multi-tool and turned fully to face her. His expression was level, unreadable in the way that humans sometimes became when they were choosing their words carefully. And your people invaded our colonies, he said, burned 3 of them to the ground, took prisoners, ran experiments on them. He met her eyes without blinking to study the problem. Soon's bioluminescent markings dimmed slightly. We believe preemptive action was more merciful than waiting, she said. The simulations all indicated that we'd eventually come for you anyway. Eli stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a tired sound, the laughter of someone who had heard a joke so many times it had long since stopped being funny and become something else entirely. Yeah, he said, that tracks too. The signal. The shelter lights flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. But not before Eli's expression had already shifted. Humor draining away and replaced with a focused, quiet alertness of someone whose instincts had just fired. That's not a power fluctuation, he muttered. Soon felt it a heartbeat later. A subtle pressure change in the electromagnetic field around the structure. A scanning pulse, precise and targeted. Aurelian energy signatures, she said. Long-range search pattern. They are combing the ruins sector by sector. Your people, Eli said. Yes. He moved to the console immediately, pulling up a holographic scan display. A 3-dimensional map of the surrounding region populated quickly, and across its surface, slow arcs of light swept in overlapping patterns, steadily converging. If they find me here with you, Soon said carefully, the operational interpretation will be either capture or collaboration. Either designation carries the same consequence. She watched his face. They will not risk a contaminated intelligence asset. They will sanitize this entire region. Including me, Eli said, including everything within 4 kilometers. Eli stared at the map. Several seconds passed. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth curved upward. Not a reassuring smile. The particular smile. Soon would later come to understand that humans wore when they had been backed into a corner and were deciding how loudly to respond. Good, he said. She blinked. Good. They brought command-level scanners, he said, already moving to a different section of the shelter. That means observers. Relay ships. Eyes watching the feed. He crouched and pulled back a section of floor plating, revealing a buried structure of cabling and crystalline components. I've been working on something. What is it? Something stupid, he said cheerfully, beginning to connect cables with practice efficiency, which is generally our most reliable move. Soon stepped closer, and her eyes widened as she recognized the components. Aurelian signal crystal, human transmission hardware, and 3 other species interface technology, somehow merged into a single hybrid device. You cannot operate Aurelian broadcast architecture, she said. The neural interface requirements alone. I'm not interfacing with it directly, he said. He looked up at her. You are. He picked up a small injector from his belt and held it up. Your signal codes. What level of authority do you carry? She hesitated. Strategic liaison. My credentials propagate through fleet command networks automatically. Perfect. He reached up, found the port on her collar translator, and connected a thin lead from the device. Before she could object, he activated it. The hybrid machine came alive. The response was immediate and enormous. Across the Aurelian command fleet in orbit, secure networks registered an impossible signal. Not a breach, not an attack. An invitation. Carrying credentials that should not exist in this location, broadcasting on frequencies that required hardware no one had any record of building. Every observer's screen in the fleet lit up simultaneously. What they saw was Soon's face. Calm, alive, uninjured, and behind her, undeniably, unmistakably, Human technology, human shelter, human hands that had built it. And beside her, Eli, leaning slightly into frame, raising one hand in an easy wave. "Hi," he said simply. "We should talk." The silence that followed lasted almost 4 seconds. In military communication terms, that was an eternity. Then the chaos started. Soon filtered through the open channel. The shouting, the alerts, the weapon systems powering up and then hesitating because no one had a protocol for this. She felt the collective disorientation of a civilization encountering something it had absolutely no framework to process. She stepped closer to the camera. "This is soon of the Aurelian Accord," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I am alive. I am unharmed. And I am under protection of a human by my own consent." The word consent hit the fleet like a stone into still water. The negotiation that wasn't. The Aurelian commander who stepped into frame was tall and rigid, his markings pulsing in sharp, controlled bursts, the bioluminescent equivalent of barely contained fury. "Human," he said, the word landing like a verdict. "You will release officer soon immediately and stand down." Eli leaned back in his chair and crossed his boots on the edge of the console. "Nah," he said pleasantly. The commander's markings flared. "This is not a negotiation." "See, that's where we disagree," Eli said. "Because from where I'm sitting, this is exactly a negotiation. The question is just whether you're going to participate consciously or stumble into the outcome by accident." Soon watched the commander's expression cycle through disbelief, anger, and something she recognized as a particular discomfort of encountering logic one cannot immediately refute. "You are harboring an Aurelian officer," the commander said. "This constitutes an act of aggression under—" "I pulled a splinter out," Eli said. "Well, a large splinter, with a lot of blood, but the principle is the same." Murmurs moved through the visible personnel behind the commander. Soon recognized a shift, not amusement, but something adjacent to it, the uncomfortable stirring of people who had expected a monster and gotten something else. "Your people attacked our colonies," Eli said, and the easy tone dropped away. Not to anger, to something quieter and somehow more dangerous. "You didn't do it because you hated us. You did it because you had run the numbers and decided we were an acceptable preemptive loss. You studied us like a variable, a problem in an equation you were trying to solve before it solved itself." The commander said nothing. "Here's what your models missed," Eli continued, leaning forward slightly. "We don't stop when things get bad. We don't retreat into certainty. We get creative." He let that word sit for a moment. "And creativity is very, very hard to model." "Enough," the commander said sharply. "This transmission ends." "Wait." Soon stepped forward before she could stop herself, and the command in her voice, years of diplomatic training, centuries of cultural authority, cut across the channel like a blade. Every person on that fleet had been conditioned since childhood to pause when a senior liaison spoke. They paused. "I am not a prisoner," she said. Her markings were steady, bright, controlled. The signal of an officer in full command of herself. "I am not speaking under duress. I am speaking because I have observed something that our tactical briefings did not prepare me for, and I believe the Accord deserves to understand it." She looked at Eli. He met her gaze with an expression she was beginning to learn. Quiet attention, no pressure. "You fear humans because they escalate," she said, addressing the fleet directly now. "Because they refuse to accept the outcomes that logic predicts. Because they continue past the point where any rational actor would stop." She drew a slow breath. "But escalation is not their defining trait. I have observed something else." She paused. "Adaptation. Not as a survival mechanism, as a philosophy." The silence that followed was different from before. The sharp, aggressive quiet of disbelief had shifted into something more uncertain, more genuinely thoughtful, and doubt, soon understood in that moment, was the most destabilizing force in the universe. The architecture of spite. An alert chimed, then several more in rapid succession. Eli was at the console before the second tone finished, eyes scanning the updated scan display. 3 vessels had dropped out of fold space just beyond the orbital perimeter. No diplomatic markers, no identification codes. Their approach vectors aggressive and direct. They saw the broadcast, Eli said. His voice was flat, and they decided instability is an opportunity. Soon recognized the energy signatures. Independent military contractors, the kind that operated in the margins of conflicts, feeding on chaos, selling resolution to whoever bid highest. They had watched a human and an Aurelian officer upend the standard order things, and they had decided that the confusion was worth exploiting. Warning sirens began cycling. The shelter shook as the first strike hit the ruins 300 meters away, close enough to rain debris across the outer sensors. Your defenses won't absorb direct fire from 3 ships, Soon said. I know. Eli's expression had gone somewhere else entirely. The focused, almost peaceful look of someone who had stopped worrying about the problem and started working on the solution. He crossed to a section of wall that looked like bare plating, and hit a recessed switch she hadn't noticed. The shelter groaned. Then the entire outer structure began to unfold. Soon stepped back instinctively as the walls peeled open in segments, like enormous mechanical pedals retracting from a buried core. Beneath the surface of the rubble, beneath meters of shattered alien architecture that she had assumed was simply debris, a network of structures emerged. Antenna arrays, power conduit spines, emitter arrays arranged in precise geometric patterns across the ruins. You hid this under a dead city, she said. People stopped looking at rubble, Eli said, hands moving rapidly across a newly exposed control surface. Humans learned that lesson the expensive way. We don't forget expensive lessons. The mercenary ships fired again. This time, the beams hit the outer field array and bent, curved smoothly away from the shelter, like water deflected by a rounded stone, dispersing harmlessly into the upper atmosphere in pale cascades of redirected energy. Soon stared. Phase redirection. You are rerouting the incoming energy through a geometric dispersal field. With math I don't fully understand, Eli confirmed cheerfully, and instincts I trust considerably more than instruction manuals. He opened a broad-spectrum channel. Every observer in the system, Aurelian Command, neutral parties, the mercenary fleet, the scattered intelligence platforms of a dozen other species, received the signal simultaneously. This is Eli Carter, he said. I'm human. He let that land for a moment. You're all watching because you're trying to figure out what we are, he continued. Monsters or miracles, threat or asset, problem or solution. He glanced at Soon briefly. Here's the honest answer. We're none of those things. We're problem solvers. And we solve problems the only way we know how, by refusing to accept the options we're given and finding ones that weren't on the menu. The final pulse was not a weapon. It was a precision electromagnetic disruption, targeted, calibrated, and exquisitely controlled. It swept across the mercenary fleet and stripped their systems down to basic life support and structural integrity. No explosions, no casualties, 3 ships adrift and powerless, their crews alive, their hulls intact, their weapons simply gone. The message was clear. Humanity could win without destruction. The heart of the civilization that feared them, the Aurelian capital, did not burn. That alone was enough to make history. For centuries, every recorded first contact between humanity and the Aurelian Accord had concluded in the same predictable way, with overwhelming Aurelian force, absolute control, and the permanent elimination of the human element from the equation. Their capital world, Letha Prime, was considered unreachable by any external actor. A city planet encased in layered probability fields and deflection shields so dense that even light bent slightly around its outer atmosphere. And now a human ship was descending toward it. Eli stood at the viewport with his arms folded, watching the planet grow from a pale disk to a world of impossible beauty. Towers of living crystal rose from the surface in interlocking spirals, their bioluminescent energy making the landscape glow from within as though the planet itself were alive. The geometry of the city below them was precise, mathematical, breathtaking. Well, Eli said quietly, at least it's pretty. Soon stood beside him, marking steady and bright. You are the first human being ever permitted to approach Letha Prime, she said, in the recorded history of the Accord. Always nice to be a first, he replied. The ship touched down without incident. The council chamber was a vault of curved living crystal and flowing light, its ceiling lost somewhere in the upper distance. Aurelian elders regarded him from elevated platforms that formed a broken ring around the central floor, their markings controlled to near stillness. The diplomatic mass of people who had spent centuries perfecting the art of revealing nothing. Eli felt every eye. He felt the weight of their fear and their calculation, and their curiosity pressing against him from every direction. He did not shrink from it. "You stand before us without weapons," one elder observed. "Habit," Eli said. "I find that conversations go better when I'm not pointing something at people." An uncomfortable ripple passed through the chamber. "Why involve yourself in matters of galactic diplomacy?" Another elder demanded. "You are a soldier, a salvager. What claim do you have on these proceedings?" "None," Eli said. He looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the golden eyes of each elder in turn. "But you made humans part of your proceedings a long time ago, when you decided to model us, test us, and strike before we could become inconvenient. You asked the question. I'm just part of the answer." He paused. "And answering a question requires actually talking to the subject, which is something the simulations apparently skipped." Before any elder could respond, the chamber alert sounded. A rival empire, one that had watched the broadcast with particular interest and decided that the uncertainty surrounding humanity's status was an exploitable weakness, had emerged from fold space at the edge of the system. "Our defenses will hold," the eldest elder began. "You lose ships," Eli said. "Civilians in the outer rings. Time, resources, the kind of losses that take generations to process." He stepped forward. "Or," the chamber stared at him. "You let us help." "Us," an elder repeated. Eli gestured, and the chamber walls, responding to a signal from a ship in orbit, filled with holographic imagery, not warships. People, human colonies, their populations engaged in the ordinary miracle of improvisation. Engineers repurposing mining equipment, civilian communications networks rewriting their own architecture in real time, artists and scientists and scavengers working alongside each other without hierarchy or central command. A civilization that had learned, through centuries of hardship, that survival required every single one of its members to think. "We don't win by being bigger," Eli said. "We win by being everywhere, by adapting faster than the threat can track, by treating every problem as something that can be solved by whoever is standing closest to it." The rival fleet fired, and across the star system, human signals lit up, not in response to orders, but in response to the situation. Civilian ships adjusted their power outputs and became shielding nodes, old mining arrays synchronized into a dispersal grid. Communication networks restructured themselves around the attack vectors, routing energy and information through 10,000 improvised channels simultaneously. The attack didn't break. It was absorbed, distributed across so many points of resistance that it simply ran out of force before it ran out of targets. The rival fleet retreated. The council chamber was very quiet. "You did not seek to destroy them," the eldest elder said slowly. "Not a question, an observation. An attempt to process something that existed outside every existing model." "No point," Eli said. "Destroying them makes them a martyr and us a threat. Stopping them makes them an example and us a possibility." He looked at Soon. She met his gaze across the chamber floor. "We are revising our position on humanity." The eldest elder said at last. The word seemed to cost her something. Not as a threat to be neutralized, as a potential partner to be understood. Eli exhaled, slowly, quietly, a breath he had been holding for what felt like hours. "Good," he said, "because we are genuinely terrible enemies, but we make extraordinary neighbors." What the galaxy learned. Later, in the quiet of the ship, Soon stood beside Eli as Letha Prime fell away behind them and stars opened up in every direction. "You changed everything," she said. He shook his head. "I didn't do anything dramatic. I just didn't behave the way everyone expected." She looked at him for a long moment. This strange, stubborn, impossible human who had knelt instead of stood over her, who had offered medicine instead of a weapon, who had turned a battlefield into a broadcast, and a broadcast into a negotiation, and a negotiation into something the galaxy would spend decades trying to name. "That," she said softly, "is precisely what makes you dangerous." He smiled. "Far across the inhabited systems, in databases and intelligence archives, and the private records of 100 different civilizations. A new file was being compiled. Analysts and strategists and philosophers added their observations over the following months, trying to summarize what they had witnessed into something their leaders could act on. The document was titled, simply, The Human Problem. Its final notation read, Classification, unpredictable. Threat level, contextual. Primary strength, adaptive cooperation. Do not assume fear defines them. They do not respond to fear as other species do. They convert it. They turn uncertainty into possibility. The galaxy expected monsters. What it found instead was something it had no name for, a species that chose every single time what it became, and